In 1874, an Iowa farmer named Lorenzo Coffin was riding in a caboose on routine business when the train slowed to couple a freight car. He watched through the window as the rear brakeman stepped between the approaching cars, held up a heavy iron link, and tried to guide it into the drawbar socket as the two cars rolled toward each other. The timing had to be perfect. The brakeman's hand had to be inside the gap, holding the link steady, and then out again before the cars came together. His timing was off by half a second. The cars closed, and the man's hand was caught between iron and iron. When they pulled him free, two of his fingers were gone. Coffin, horrified, asked the other trainmen if this kind of thing happened often. They told him it happened all the time. They told him it was so common that when a man walked into a railroad hiring office looking for work as a brakeman, the yardmaster would ask him to hold up his hands. If the man was missing fingers, that meant he had experience. He got the job. That was the link and pin coupler, a device so simple it was barely a machine, and so dangerous that it killed over 300 railroad workers a year and maimed thousands more during the decades it served as the standard method of connecting every freight car in America. If you want to see which machine I cover next, subscribe and drop it in the comments. A link and pin coupler was about as primitive as railroad technology gets. Each freight car had a drawbar protruding from both ends, a heavy iron tongue with a socket at the tip. To connect two cars, a brakeman placed a U-shaped iron link into the socket of one drawbar, then stood between the cars as they were slowly pushed together by the locomotive. As the second car approached, he had to guide the open end of the link into the receiving socket and drop a heavy iron pin down through a hole in the top of the drawbar to lock it in place. All of this while standing between two rolling freight cars that weighed anywhere from 10 to 40 tons each. The entire operation depended on the brakeman getting his hands and his body out from between the cars before they came together. The engineer sitting up in the locomotive cab usually could not see the brakeman at all. The man in the gap was working on timing, on feel, on blind faith. And because no two drawbar heights were exactly the same, because the links came in different sizes, because the sockets were worn or bent from years of abuse, the brakeman frequently had to reach in and wrestle the link into position while the cars were still moving. Now here is what the numbers looked like when the killing was at its peak. The first reliable statistics came from the newly formed Interstate Commerce Commission in 1889, and they were staggering. In that single year, 1 out of every 35 railroad workers in America was injured on the job. For trainmen, the men who actually worked on and around the moving cars, the rate jumped to 1 in 12. 1 out of every 117 railroad workers died at work that year. Coupling alone accounted for roughly 44% of all railroad injuries. In 1888, 518 men were killed in coupling accidents. 300 of those deaths were linked specifically to the link and pin coupler. Between 1877 and 1887, coupling and uncoupling made up 38% of all injuries to brakemen and switchmen. By 1893, the Railroad Gazette reported 5,623 railroad worker deaths and 20,445 injuries in the preceding decade. A trainman in 1893 had a 1 in 9 chance of being injured and a 1 in 115 chance of being killed in a single year of work. Congressman Henry Cabot Lodge looked at these figures in 1892 and said plainly that these men suffered as if they were fighting a war. Could you imagine walking into a job knowing you had a 1 in 9 chance of being injured before the year was out? If you can, let me know in the comments. The link and pin coupler was only half the brakeman's nightmare. The other half was stopping the train. Before George Westinghouse's air brake was widely adopted, every freight train in America was stopped by hand. When the engineer gave the whistle signal, Brakemen climbed to the tops of the freight cars and ran along the rooftops from car to car, turning a heavy iron brake wheel on each one to press the brake shoes against the wheels below. They did this on moving trains at speed in every kind of weather. In winter, the rooftops were coated with ice and snow. The tracks were often uneven, and at 14 feet above the rail, every bump and sway was magnified into a violent lurch that could throw a man sideways. Brakemen carried a short iron bar called a brake club for leverage on stuck wheels, but a frozen wheel that suddenly broke free could send a man tumbling between the cars or under them. Low bridges and tunnel entrances were another constant threat. Railroads eventually installed telltales, dangling ropes or chains hung over the track before low clearances, so a brakeman on top of a car would feel the rope hit his face and have a few seconds to drop flat. Not everyone made it down in time. Henry David Thoreau, passing beneath one bridge in Lincoln, Massachusetts in 1856, wrote in his journal that at least 10 men had been swept dead from the tops of cars at that single bridge within as many years. The local newspaper confirmed it. Year after year, brakemen were knocked from the rooftops and crushed beneath the wheels at the same spot. Thoreau called it the murderous Lincoln Bridge. The combination was devastating. Couple the cars from between them. Break the train from on top of them. The link and pin coupler and the handbrake were a matched pair of killers, and the men trapped between them had no recourse and no protection. Railroad work in the 1880s was the second deadliest occupation in America, behind only coal mining. Brakemen could not even buy life insurance. No company would write a policy for a man whose job required him to stand between moving freight cars and run across their rooftops. So they formed their own mutual aid societies, pooling money to pay out when one of them was killed. In 1883, the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen was founded in a caboose in Oneonta, New York. Born directly from the need to take care of the widows and orphans the railroads would not. You are probably wondering whether a better coupler existed, and the answer tells you everything about how industrial safety actually worked in this era. In the years after the Civil War, a dry goods clerk named Eli Janney was working in a store in Alexandria, Virginia. He had served as a major in the Confederate Army and had no engineering training, no mechanical background, and no connection to the railroad industry. But Alexandria was a railroad town. The U.S. Military Railroad had operated a major hub there during the war, and Janney saw men around town missing fingers and hands, bearing the marks of coupling accidents. The problem stuck in his mind. One day, sitting in the store, he hooked his fingers together, one hand clasping the other with the knuckles bent. He saw it immediately. Two interlocking jaws shaped like clasped hands that would lock together automatically when the cars came together and release by a lever from the side. Nobody would need to stand between the cars or wrestle an iron link into position. The cars would simply bump together, and the couplers would grab. Janney had no drafting skills, so he whittled wooden models during his lunch breaks and hired a draftsman to draw up the patent application. He received his first patent in 1868. He refined the design and received a second in 1873. Testing on the Pittsburgh, Fort Wayne, and Chicago Railway in 1874 confirmed it worked exactly as he promised. The railroad's response was to ignore it. The problem was not the design. The problem was the cost. By 1880, American railroads operated approximately 375,000 freight cars. Retrofitting all of them with automatic couplers was expensive, and because the cars interchanged freely between different railroad companies, every car on every railroad had to be converted, or the system would not work. A train with 19 automatic couplers and one link and pin car still required a brakeman to step between the cars. The railroads did the math. A brakeman earned about $1.50 a day. If he was killed, the railroad owed his family nothing. Under the legal doctrine of the time, a worker who took a dangerous job had assumed the risk. Judges ruled consistently that the railroads bore no responsibility for injuries sustained in the normal course of work. Automatic couplers and air brakes cost money. Maimed and dead brakemen cost almost nothing. Lorenzo Coffin understood this calculation, and it consumed the rest of his life. At 51 years old, the New Hampshire-born farmer, part-time preacher, and Civil War chaplain launched a 20-year crusade. He appeared at railroad offices and was thrown out. He wrote to newspapers and was ignored. In an age when railroads could buy senators, a gaunt, bearded reformer from Iowa barely registered. But Coffin would not stop. He tracked down statistics, compiled injury reports, and delivered public harangues about what he called the butchering of faithful men. He got himself appointed Iowa's first railroad commissioner in 1883. He drafted a state railroad safety act in 1890 and watched the railroads ignore it. In 1887, he organized a public demonstration of Westinghouse air brakes on a long grade outside Burlington, Iowa. A Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy locomotive started downhill with 50 freight cars behind it. At 40 miles per hour, the engineer hit the air. The freight shuddered to a dead stop in 500 feet. The technology worked. The railroad still would not adopt it voluntarily. It took federal law. By the early 1890s, the carnage had become a national scandal. Around 1890, Coffin got the ear of President Benjamin Harrison. Harrison was a conservative, pro-business Republican, but even he could not justify the numbers. On March 3, 1893, his last full day in office, Harrison signed the Safety Appliance Act into law. It mandated automatic couplers and air brakes on all railroad cars in interstate commerce. Harrison gave the pen he used to sign the bill to Lorenzo Coffin. The old farmer stood watching with tears on his face. He said he was the happiest man in all creation. The railroads were given until 1898 to comply. They missed the deadline. By mid-1898, only 68% of cars had been converted. Congress extended the deadline to January 1900, and then extended it again. But the conversions continued, and the results were immediate and dramatic. Coupler-related injuries, which had represented 32% of all railroad injuries before the act, dropped to 9% by 1900. By 1902, coupling accidents had fallen to just 4% of total worker incidents. The overall death rate among trainmen dropped 64% within 10 years of the law's passage. Deaths and injuries fell by more than a third between 1893 and 1908, even as the number of men employed rose by 43%. The link and pin coupler killed for decades after a proven alternative existed. The delay between Janney's first patent in 1868 and the Safety Appliance Act in 1893 was 25 years. The delay between the act and full compliance was another 7 years. For more than 30 years, American railroads knowingly sent men into the gap between rolling freight cars to perform a task that a mechanical device could do automatically, because the device cost money and the men did not. No one knows the true total. The ICC did not begin tracking statistics until 1889, and the worst years of the killing came in the decades before that, when the railroad network was expanding fastest and the link and pin coupler was on every car in the country. Lorenzo Coffin died in Fort Dodge, Iowa in 1915 at 91. Eli Janney, the dry goods clerk who hooked his fingers together and saw the future of railroad coupling, sold his patent rights for a modest sum and never got rich. He bought a small farm in Fairfax County, Virginia, and lived quietly until his death in 1912. His gravestone reads, "His work was a benefaction, which in itself will constitute his worthiest memorial." The Janney coupler is still in use today. Every freight train in North America, some of them over a mile long and hauling more than 10,000 tons, is held together by the same basic knuckle design that a self-taught inventor whittled from wood during his lunch breaks in 1868. The link and pin coupler is a museum piece. You can find them in railroad heritage collections, small iron loops, with a pin through the top, simple enough that a child could understand how they work. They do not look like killers, but for 30 years they ate the hands of every man who tried to use them, and the industry that profited from their labor decided year after year that the men were expendable and the money was not. Thanks for tuning in. For more stories about the machines and devices that killed the people who worked with them, check the videos on screen. And if you want to see what we investigate next, subscribe.